They're all. I told someone, yes, thank you, Simone. I told someone it's the whole building is vibrating, and I think this is definitely, you live up to the promise. But now I kindly ask you to be silent, be seated. And I would like to give the floor to our director, Jacques van der Vorst, to open this keynote session. Welcome, Jacques.
Thank you, Sigrid. It's indeed vibrating, yeah. Excellent. Excellent to see you all here in Wageningen. Welcome all. You had already a beautiful day, I heard yesterday, with a lot of dialogues, debates. And when I look at the title, Transforming Consumption Production Systems Towards Just and Sustainable Futures. Yeah, that's, I think, exactly indeed what we should be talking about. How can we go to a just and sustainable future? I assume yesterday our rector, Arthur Mol, also said something about the strategy of Wageningen. The term we always use is finding answers together. And that's, I think, also exactly what is happening here with people from business from academics, politicians. Nice discussion we're going to have in a few minutes. Together, indeed, we have to make these changes. When you look at sustainable production, sustainable consumption on food, I always think about the term sharp food. I did some research myself on that in the past, which is really about, it's not only about sustainability, it's also about health. It's also about affordability, about availability. It's about reliability, safety, and it's about palatability. So a lot of elements that we are working on. And in the past, of course, we worked more independently on those different topics. But the key is, of course, to integrate it and to bring it together. You can have a sustainable food, but when it's not tasteful, it will not be eaten. So that doesn't work. When it's sustainable, but it's not sufficient, we also have a problem. So I think that's exactly what the conference is all about, and to see how we can help each other in that. The link to Brussels, last year we had the Mansholt lecture. I'm not sure, Diederik, if you were there, but coming September we have one again. Last year it was about nature positive futures. So that links very much to what is happening up here. And by the way, in those Mansholt lectures we try to indeed set a picture of the future and go in debate with politicians upon what should happen towards that future. This conference is also about circular societies, about education and learning, energy and mobility transformations, quite broad, so compliments on that, to bring all those different elements together. And of course the policy dialogue sessions. I believe next to this session there will be a hybrid dialogue debate session on pathways for the sustainability transition of Ukraine's post-conflict food system. Well, how topical can you be? Indeed a pity they can't be here, but great that they will be there online. And also a session from AMS, the Amsterdam Institute for Advanced Metropolitan Solutions, on transforming the food system, bottom-up governance in the urban arena. We're talking about sustainable food systems, and of course that has a rural aspect, but also a lot of urban aspects. And we see a lot of urbanization taking place, so that a lot has to be done there as well. Like I said, it is about connecting science, knowledge, with developments in policies, doing things together. I have to think about what happened last evening. We have a crisis in the Netherlands, if you look at the cabinet. I hope things will go well. Otherwise, doing things together will be a problem in the Netherlands for the coming period. So let's hope that works well. The conference provides many sessions for fruitful discussions, exchange of ideas. We look forward to that. I'm now going to give the floor to Professor Philip Vervacht, one of the co-founders and the board member of SCORAI, but you've been introduced already. And of course, I look forward to the session with Diederik Samson. Diederik, thanks for coming. We really look forward to your presentation and probably a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
No, I have Wow, thank you for getting up so early and being here. So yesterday we had these two keynotes by Julia Steinberger and Louis Akenji, which really criticized everything that we were doing as basically tinkering in the marsh. We also have been talking a lot about how to get from theory and research into practice, into the real world. How can we make a difference? So that's why we came up with the idea to invite somebody who is really very experienced in doing that, Diederik Samson, who is, I first knew him as the director of Greenpeace Netherlands. He was a very visible fighter for the environment back in the 80s and 90s, I think, right? And he also managed an energy company, I think. And then he became the party leader of the Social Democratic Party of the Netherlands, the PvdA, the Partij van de Arbeid. And he was the co-founder of a cabinet together with the VVD, the Freedom and Democracy Party, for 4 years before he was voted out. Then he found himself a new job, and this is an even more important job, which is basically the right-hand person of Frans Timmermans. And if you don't know who Frans Timmermans is, he's the vice chair of the European Commission, and he is all doing sustainability. To be more precise, European Green Deal and climate action in the European Union. And Diederik just told me that at this moment there is a crucial fight going on about a nature conservation directive in the EU, where there will be a crucial vote in the European Parliament. But Diederik is in the executive branch, and he's the right-hand man, the chief of cabinet of Frans Timmermans. So we thought, who else could be better to introduce this subject to him than him? So just a few words. EU has been very active in promoting in green energy technologies, carbon capture storage, and hydrogen. And we all applaud that. But we also know that technology is not the solution. If we don't do something about our consumption and our levels of consumption, we will not get there. Now, the EU has developed some policies, like sustainable product policies, eco-design, eco-labeling, and policies for durability and second-hand products. And Diederik, correct me if I'm wrong. A new initiative is empowering consumers for a green transition. And these are all very important and good policies, but we need to go further. The floor is yours, Diederik. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for your kind introduction. Indeed, I might tell you a story about the Green Deal, which is an environmental policy that survived not only one, but two of the biggest geopolitical crises mankind can ever imagine: a pandemic and a war. And I say that because I think let's say the more older people in this room who work on environmental issues for more than decades know that that is not self-evident. On the contrary, an environmental policy is most of the time the worst victim of every political crisis, let alone a geopolitical crisis. Because if there's a political crisis, we don't have time for those, environmental things, do we? No. So in the lowest possible drawer, you will never hear back from that again. I mean, I've lived long enough, and indeed in politics, I was there in 2008 when Al Gore walked into Europe with a movie in his back. It was an inconvenient truth. Nobody in the US cared about it, but in Europe, he mesmerized the public and the politicians. And I remember op-eds in the newspaper, the Financial Times, from Tony Blair and Jan-Peter Balkenende, saying, this is our moment, this is our time, we have to step up to the plate, future generations, well, you know the drill. And so for a moment, I thought, wow, we're getting there, finally. And then Lehman Brothers fell. The financial crisis wiped out all the other priorities, and we've never heard from an inconvenient truth again. There was a sequel made, by the way, nobody cared. So that was the normal course of action for environmental policies. But the Green Deal followed a different pathway. The pandemic, we hardly remember it, but it put our economy on a pause or on a hold within a week, March 2020. And I remember because we wrote the Green Deal in 2019, December, so the ink was only dry, it was just dry, and there we were in the biggest geopolitical crisis that you can, a health crisis, a pandemic. And I thought, okay, here we go again. These were 3 great months, and I can now do something different because, what's more important than people's health? And indeed, for a few weeks, everybody was frantically running around the world trying to find PPE materials and ICs and trying to save people's lives, rightfully so. But then after a few weeks, we were already in the European Commission at least, which is a bit different from Den Haag and a bit more distant from, let's say, the fray of the day. So we have the time to sit down and think about what's next. So we sat down and thought about what's next. We have to recover our economy. We have to rebuild it. And, well, what's more logic than rebuilding an economy in a green way, because we needed a green future anyway. And here it was, that plan, the Green Deal. So instead of putting it in the lowest possible drawer, we put it on steroids with 750 billion euros in extra money to accomplish all the ambitions that were set out in the Green Deal. So, and then the war came later, but I might come back to that in a minute. But an important question you might ask yourself is, why was this different? Why is the Green Deal different from normal environmental policies that you can receive dozens from, especially out of Brussels, in the last 10 to 20 years? I think there's three big differences. The first one is its ambition. I'm not going to bore you with the internal cuisine of the European Commission, but there is a little time frame between two commissions, and this was in the summer of 2019, where the old commission is gone and the new is not there yet. And that's a time frame that you have carte blanche, literally. So we sat in front of a white piece of paper and thought, okay, so for one moment, this particular moment, for once we do not have to settle for what is normal in politics, the lowest common denominator, because that's normally the landing strip of policy. For once we could escape that logic and write down what is really needed to save our planet for future generations. So hence the ambition to become fully climate neutral, hence the ambition to stop the loss of biodiversity, hence the ambition to stop pollution altogether, and hence the ambition to become fully circular. 4 ambitions in one plan. And that's the second big difference with normal environmental policies that you received in the past. Normal environmental policies were also always about one thing. They were about agriculture, and then about water, and then one about transport, and then one about energy, and then one about industry, and if you put them together, you could draw the conclusion that they worked against each other. This time was different. So we could develop one plan for all those ambitions. And come to think of it, there's nothing more logical than that, because there is only one ecosystem, and you need one plan because everything is connected with each other in that ecosystem, as we, by the way, endured during the pandemic. So one plan, one ecosystem, multiple objectives. And I want to pick one out because, yes, that's topical at the moment. We are in the fight of our lives for the nature restoration law. A vote is coming up next Wednesday in the European Parliament, and I need 353 votes in favor of it because there's 705 members of the European Parliament. Well, some might trip over the bike, so with a few less I can get there. But that's about biodiversity. And there's a strange difference between the two. I mean, climate change and biodiversity. I would argue climate change by now has been very different 10 years ago, but climate change by now has a political business case. And I mean, as a politician, you get better, more important, and most important, you get more votes if you speak more about climate change and renewable energy. That's a political business case because there's a real business case. And the connection is evident. For birds and bees, biodiversity, that's not the situation. Birds and bees don't have a real business case, and I would argue, therefore, they do not have a political business case yet, at least. So as a politician, you don't get better, you don't get more important, you don't get more votes if you talk more about birds and bees and trees and the need to preserve all of that. While at the same time, and you scientists might know that better than I do, obviously you cannot compare apples to oranges, but if you do for a moment, the loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing right now, the 6th mass extinction, purely man-made, is a bigger threat to future generations and their well-being than climate change is. Again, don't compare apples to oranges. Both are existential. But both are. But with such a different political business case, you can see the fight for climate change or against climate change for renewable energy and a sustainable energy system. You can see that run pretty smoothly. Well, with some hiccups, obviously, nothing is easy. While the fight for biodiversity is just beginning. And that should bother us. Because we already lost so much time finding a political business case for climate and energy. And that political business case arose, that was born from, not from brave politicians. There's not that many brave politicians. But it was born from society, when people went on holiday and the whole island was on fire. Not just a forest fire, but the whole island was on fire. And they went to the south of Spain and they inhaled air that was on fire in their perception because it was 48 degrees. Or they went on a skiing holiday to the most snow-secure area of Europe and there was no snow. And then people start to wonder and worry. And that's what happened in the, let's say, past 5 to 10 years. But if we transfer that to biodiversity, if we have to wait until the summer without bees, we're too late. So this time we need politicians with more bravery, with more audacity, to front-run this situation and not wait until people see it with their own eyes, because then we might be too late. So I was with the differences between a Green Deal and normal environmental policy. Ambition, one plan, and the third is actually maybe most contested also maybe in this room. It was not an environmental policy. It was an economic plan, and a growth strategy, a real growth strategy, because Europe needed growth. Europe is, let's face it, an aging continent. Houses are aging, the industry is aging, we as people are aging. We needed new impetus, new momentum, new energy, maybe literally, to power this continent forward into the future. A growth strategy. And it was referred to, I have a background in the environmental movement, and I remember vividly that presenting the Green Deal as a growth strategy raised some eyebrows with my former comrades. Because how on earth can you combine such a huge ambition to save the planet and its ecosystem with economic growth? Come on. And yet, I maintain that that is possible. And actually, I do maintain that there is no alternative. We need growth. But growth is not a number. Growth is a direction. So in mathematical terms, it doesn't have a size, it has a direction, a vector. And you need to change the vector. You need to change the direction. Don't concentrate on size, which is actually the only thing we do. Because if you read the newspaper, you only read 2.4 or 2.5 or 1.0 or 0.1 and then we get nervous, or minus 0.1 and then we get really nervous. But that's only the size. Nobody talks about the direction. And that's what we should concentrate on. Because if you, I know, and I have been a degrowther for a large part of my life, being convinced that living outside of planetary boundaries could only be solved by going back into the planetary boundaries by shrinking, literally, degrowthing. But then you sit back and realize that every one of us, every morning, gets out of bed with one little ambition: to do a little better today compared to yesterday. Every one of you this morning got out of bed going to this conference because you want to learn a little more and translate that knowledge later on into your own research, your own activities. The ambition to do a little better, if you multiply that with 7 billion people on planet Earth, all getting out of bed with that same ambition, that's growth. And that's what drives us forward. So instead of trying to push that back, we need to channel it into the right direction. And I do think that that's something we are just starting to scratch the surface of. So why is the Green Deal so far pretty successful? As I said, because of the way we designed it, but obviously that's not the only reason. There's also external factors. The Green Deal is operating in another environment than 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. And I think there's two main differences between now and this time and 10 to 20 years ago. And the first one is technology. Technology and the development of technology that we are experiencing right now is breathtaking. It's mind-boggling. And it's reason for an enormous amount of optimism. I wasn't educated in Wageningen, but in Delft, so yes, I'm a techno-optimist. But and to be honest, for a long time I didn't have much reason to be optimistic about technology. I mean, I take you, well, let's say 12 years back. Somewhere around 2010, the first offshore wind farm in the Netherlands got a license to build it and a license to be subsidized. The subsidizing license read, "Dear people from Gemini," it was now, because the project went haywire many times and it was bought by a hedge fund, Gemini. So the Gemini people got a license and a subsidy of 16 cents per kilowatt hour. 16 cents per kilowatt hour to build and operate an offshore wind farm under a healthy business case. At that time, electricity from coal-fired and gas-fired power stations was about 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So you needed 4 times the amount of money. If you take the back of an envelope and you calculate how much money we would have needed to power the Netherlands with a subsidy of 16 cents for every kilowatt hour that we need, it's 300 billion a year. That's reason for pessimism. There's no way that a politician or that any society could accept that. But fast forward 10 years, which is for the development of offshore wind, which, mind you, is not Netflix, it's not Google, it's not software made out of a garage. No, it's huge amounts of steel, big ships, enormous blades, huge turbines. And in 10 years' time, it went from 16 to less than 4 cents per kilowatt hour. That's an accomplishment equal to a revolution, a technological revolution. And solar panels, ladies and gentlemen, are doing better than that. Only 10, 15 years ago, if you had the first solar panels on your roof, and I had, when you went to a family party with your right-wing uncle and tried to explain to him how good it was that you had those blue plates on your roof, providing you with a little electricity, he was rolling his eyes. Come on, all that money for that little piece of energy. Doesn't make any difference. By now, you can tell your right-wing uncle that you are better off financially having solar panels on your roof. Because, well, solar panels on a roof installed under Dutch labor conditions, so they come with 2, they have a whole scaffolding system because they're not allowed to fall off the roof, etc. I'm very proud of all those labor conditions that we have legalized in the Netherlands, but it's pretty expensive. But if you do that, and you have those 5, 6 panels on your roof, they provide you electricity for about 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Google for energieprijsvergelijker.nl, the price comparison website, you don't get below 20. And that's even a bargain. So solar electricity from your own roof is the cheapest you can get. And still people will think, oh, come on, solar energy. It's still there somewhere in the corner of powering caravans and calculators instead of powering our society. Yes, indeed, if you would power the Netherlands, if you want to power the Netherlands fully with renewable energy, a large part of it being electricity, a large part of it being solar electricity, you need about 600 square kilometers of solar panels to reach that objective. 600 square kilometers of solar panels. That sounds like an undoable amount. China put down 150 square kilometers of solar panels last month, in 1 month. Next month, they will do it again. And the month after that, they might do a little more. In 4 months' time, they will do what the Netherlands needs to do in 30 years' time. Well, yes, we are smaller than that, than China, but come on, what they can do in 4 months, we can do in 30 years. Technology is driving us forward. Is that enough? I doubt it. But luckily, there's another factor at play. Maybe even more, much more important than technology. It's you. Or, more precisely, the young generation amongst you. In all my conversations about the Green Deal in the last 3 years, and I had an enormous amount of conversations, as you can imagine, with people that think they are very important, and to be honest, sometimes they are. So you have high civil servants, ministers, CEOs of big companies. There's something strange happening in all those conversations. At one point, in every of those conversations, no one exempted, it turns to their own children. Their own children, asking questions. Small ones, why do we eat so much meat? Is that really necessary? Bigger ones, why do we go on a holiday to Bali? Should we really fly all the way around the planet? And existential ones. Hey dad, hey mom, what are you doing to save my future? And if that dad or mom happens to be the CEO of Mercedes-Benz, it's quite an existential question. Because I can assure you, for the CEO of Mercedes-Benz, a bad headline about Dieselgate in the newspaper is a bad day. Or a bad shareholders meeting about lacking profits, it's a bad day. But not being able to answer your own children, asking a pretty pertinent or existential question, that's much more than a bad day. And I'm convinced that that is changing the world. So even more than our policies, even more than technology, I think the world at the moment the change in the world is driven most from the kitchen table, where those conversations take place. And that brings me obviously to the topic of this conference. Can we enhance that? Can we motivate that even more? To be honest, I would argue, stay out of it. But maybe that's because I'm from the European Commission, which would be, if you would want to find an administrative layer that could enhance this development, the last one you should end up with is the European Commission. But in a broad sense, obviously, we have a question to answer also from a policy perspective. Because what we see is that our policies obviously can be designed as well as they can, and I'm biased as the Cuban state television, obviously, but I think we're doing a pretty good job in designing our policies the best way we can. But the nature restoration law that I just talked about, that we will have to vote on next week, proves that even a very well-designed policy runs into resistance in society if you don't create an atmosphere of acceptance in that society. So here's where I think the interaction between what we do as governments or administrations and what happens in society should be improved. We can no longer rely on the iterative process that we were used to in the past. So we throw a law into society and then we see what happens. In about 5 to 10 years' time, it will become visible what happens. And then if not the right thing doesn't happen, we change the law and we try again. We don't have the time anymore to do that. So we need to be quicker. The iteration needs to be on a daily basis almost. And that's where I must admit, and that's why I like this conference so much, that's where, at least on a European, but I would argue, because I know I've been there from experience, also on a national level, we are we are just scratching the surface, not more than that. We don't know exactly how we can improve the speed of the interaction between what we want to happen and what is happening out there. So at the end of my introduction, I will leave that question to you. You know what our policies are and how they are designed. You can read it. I explained a little more about it now in my introduction. You know what society feels, I think much better than I do. I talked about the change, the drivers for change in that society, but we don't know exactly how they interact, how we can make our law, our nature restoration law, to use a topical example. Why might it fall flat? Why might the acceptance of that law not be the one that we desire? That's for me to answer and design a better law, but it might also be for you to answer and design new ideas and policies or other incentives to change society and make and increase the acceptance of the way we work forward. If we can do that in a hurry, because we don't have that much time, I'm still very confident and optimistic that in the end, we will get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diederik. This was a great introduction. We decided to keep it short so that there is ample time for questions. What really spoke to me was the metaphor of the kitchen table. And I agree with you. When many years ago we started this strategies for the sustainable household project with visioning and backcasting, we started at the kitchen table. And so there is where the decisions are being made. So the question for all of us is, how do we reach the kitchen table, including our own? The floor is yours. Who has questions? Please. Please stand up and introduce yourself. No, stand up, please, because other people otherwise cannot see you.
Hi, I'm Leslie King from Smith College in Massachusetts in the US. And first of all, thank you so much for that talk. It's super interesting. I guess what I wanted to say and just ask, so I appreciate and also sort of am envious of your techno-optimism. I would really like to be more optimistic about the technologies. So I have just two questions I want to ask. The first one is about the technologies. And in terms of climate change, I totally see how technologies can help us get to a more climate, lower our carbon emissions. But are we not, by doing that, threatening the biodiversity situation that you were talking about, mining for lithium and cobalt and all of the things we need for electric car batteries and blah, blah, blah. So you know all those. So I just wanted to throw that out as a question. And the second question is about the kitchen table and the kids asking their parents. If the kid's mom or dad is CEO of a publicly traded corporation, that CEO is responsible to their shareholders and has to show a profit. So what do we do with that contradiction? How does that CEO both, I know there's a sort of a business case for doing this, and they can say they can show a profit, but I just interviewed 52 people and doing their sustainability professionals working in corporations, and they found contradictions constantly. So I'm just curious about those two things. Thank you for the lesson.
Yeah. About the first contradiction, biodiversity versus the new technologies that we need to decarbonize our economy, not just a little, but completely, before 2050, a fully decarbonized economy. And obviously we can't imagine that because we are living the age of fossil fuels, but that age only lasts, if we do our job, for 200 years, which is a blip in the history of mankind. So it should be possible, but that's more a philosophical idea. But you're completely right. There is obviously no way to produce energy, or basically to transfer the energy that we get from outside, which is the sun. That's the basis of all our renewable energy, apart from tidal, because that's from the moon. But still, so we get that energy from outside. There's no way to turn that energy into usable exergy, because that's what we're talking about when we want to drive things and heat stuff, etc. without environmental impact. It's not possible. That it doesn't exist. A zero environmental impact doesn't exist. But an environmental impact that added together stays within planetary boundaries, that does exist. It's actually pretty easy to calculate, even with the lithium and the germanium and all the stuff that we need. It's pretty easy to calculate that a fully renewable energy system fits within planetary boundary for 12 billion people at a European wealth. There's only one thing that doesn't fit, and that's our diet. So if we continue the European diet and expand that to 12 billion people on Earth, and I use the number 12 billion because that's where we will end up somewhere, might be 1 billion less or more, but at the end of the century, that's what we will be. 12 billion. If they all eat like a European, you need a second planet. So we need to figure that out. And actually, there's also already now technology being developed to do that, but I would argue changing your diet might be an easier way. But still, but the conflict between biodiversity and all those solar panels and windmills, etc., that's what we're living. And actually, I live it on a daily basis because the Green Deal is one plan and it has one team, my team. And I have the biodiversity people sitting on one side and the solar panel people on the other side of the table. And for instance, when we had this horrible war, the invasion of Russia, and we did realize that we had sleepwalked ourselves for the last 25 years into a fully overdependency of our most precious natural resource, natural gas, from one supplier. So 40% of our gas came from one supplier, Russia, an adversary supplier for the last 5 decades, and actually an enemy right now. We had sleepwalked ourselves into that. It's crazy, but okay. We woke up from that sleepwalk and we decided to end that. And then all my solar panel people said, well, okay, guys, now everything has to be pushed aside. This is our overarching objective. While the biodiversity people said, well, no, there's another objective. And if you only go for the short-term objective, you will run into the next wall. So here we are trying to consolidate both of the objectives. And I think we can do that. But again, I'm a techno-optimist by heart. And by the way, indeed, there's one thing that, as a techno-optimist or as a researcher, you should never do, is extrapolate the things that are happening right now. Because things are going, as I said, at mind-boggling speed. So yes, I see all those graphs about the amount of lithium or neodymium that we need, the rare earth metals, and that we won't have them, and that we won't have them here. And again, we end up being fully dependent on China. Well, you know all the stories about it. But the current battery that we have, lithium-ion battery, is just the beginning of the development curve. There's already people developing, at the institute that you work at, I think, developing solid-state batteries based on iron, the most available material in the world and 100% recyclable. A battery based on iron, which, by the way, stores twice the amount of energy in the same amount of weight. The only problem is it's pretty explosive, which is in a car. In a car, it's a little disadvantage. So something to work on. But those bright people and the bright people that are now in primary school, the bright kids might go into a situation where they can invent things that we can't even imagine. Like we invented things that our parents couldn't even imagine. The iPhone is in everybody's pocket. So I have reason for that optimism, I think. And shortly on your second one, yes, obviously, as I said, the CEO of Mercedes-Benz has to face his shareholders. And then in the evening, he goes back to the kitchen table. And that's a confrontational issue. And not everyone is dealing with that confrontation in the right way. I mean, the new CEO of Shell International declared bluntly that he would go full shareholders' value, maximizing the profits, drilling every bit of fossil fuel out of the earth crust that he could find. Well, I'm not sure what his kids tell him or where he picked that up, but at least he didn't go through that confrontation yet. So indeed, we still have work to do. That confrontation is obvious. And in the end, you have always laws and regulations that might push him into the other direction. Huh?
Thank you. I want to remind you and ourselves that there are also people who are looking all around the world streaming. So if somebody from those people there want to ask a question, please put it in the chat box and somebody will let me know, hopefully. So
Yeah.
are there many questions here? Okay, you already have the mic.
There's a
Yeah.
question from the chat from Martin Calisto.
Can you
Vrij.
stand up, please?
Ooh.
There's a question from Martin Calisto Fryand. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it says, I found Dederic's argument for not embracing the growth quite unconvincing. Humans have embraced many sufficiency philosophies and traditions, from Buddhism to indigenous worldviews from the Andes Mountains. Could you please elaborate on what's the problem with the growth today?
Well, as I said, there's this philosophical problem, but if that's unconvincing, and I fully acknowledge that that might be unconvincing to somebody who converted to Buddhism or else, but I was maybe talking from a pretty Western point of view, so I stand corrected there. But there's a few other arguments, and I've used one of them. There's actually 12 billion of them. There's 12 billion people going to live on Earth. And if you want to do something about it, well, better forget about that. The people that will get the children that bring us to 12 billion are already there. So this is going to happen. The only thing you can do to defuse the human time bomb, as they say, is education, 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 and we're going to do a lot of that. It's actually education to women. Every year that a girl goes to secondary school, she gets one child less. And that's an iron formula. So education, education, but then still we will get to 12 billion people. And I think degrowth is talking about a Western point of view, is a pretty Western point of view. Because of those 12 billion, at least, well, let's talk about the 7 that we have right now, 5 are living close to or below poverty lines. How on earth could we argue degrowth for them? And yet you can say, okay, then we have to degrowth, and so that we create room for them. Yes, that would be a possibility if you can convince enough people to do that, but it would be a pretty big degrowth because we are not that many, and they are. So mathematically, we would have to degrowth with 75%. I don't think that's going to happen. And again, I don't think it's needed. But that might be my presumption based on technology optimism and other things, but I don't think it's needed. And obviously you're right that at some point, the growth doesn't have to be maximized anymore. That's the other extreme which should be abolished. Maximizing our growth is the wrong objective. Growth is not an objective in itself at all. So indeed, if you grow about 1 to 2% as a Western society, and 4 to 5% as a developing country, that's good. And we did a lot more in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and then it stopped a little because of our demography. But so we overgrowth a lot, and we should be ashamed of that, yes. But at the moment, I think we could go on a stable pathway.
Thank you. Another question, please. Yeah, Joachim is next. Yeah, first you.
Hi, my name is Violet Ross. Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. You speak very well, so thank you. I'm a PhD here at Wageningen University studying reflexive law and governance with the law group and environmental policy group. And you said, so the normal process for putting a law out, you have kind of 5 or 10 years to test its reaction, and then there's learning. Then the EU can learn from it and update and make new laws. But you say we don't have time for that anymore. We need feedback on a daily basis almost. So I want to know what kind of strategies you have in mind, if you could elaborate, if the EU is thinking, inward and thinking, how can we change? What is wrong with the current processes? Or are you talking about new kinds of laws? And can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah,
Thank you.
but if I'm going to explain to you what our policies are to do this interaction more quickly and more thoroughly, you're going to laugh at me. We have public consultations. So we put a thing on a website that actually nobody can find, but still. We put a thing on a website where we say, oh, we're going to put out this law, please comment on it. Which is it's real fun to read it. First of all, the only reactions are professional reactors. So it's the lobby that makes use of this, and which is fine because you need to know all the sounds but that's professional. We can't get through the kitchen table. That's my plea. That's almost my desperation here. We can make laws and hope that they are correct, and to be honest, after 50 years of practice, we do pretty good there. So not all our laws fail. Actually, they're pretty efficient, but they're not perfect. And with the challenge that we have and the speed at which we need to meet that challenge, we need to strive for perfection. And the nature restoration law is my first, or not my first, but my most prominent example of where an imperfect law stumbles into this problem because apparently we were not able to find the inroads in society. So the wall that farmers have built up, because that's where the pushback comes from, or I should say the agro-industry, but okay, large farmers and the rest. That wall, we couldn't penetrate it. We couldn't find it. We just starting to do it right now. I have 5 days left, but it's and that's our challenge. So I should ask the question to you. Basically, give us the tools to make that more, to make that perfect.
Thank you. Next question is from Joachim Spangenberg.
Joachim Spangenberg, Seri Institute and Scientific Committee of the European Environment Agency. Well, first of all, thank you for your presentation, not only regarding the content, but also regarding the performance. It was really convincing. You almost convinced me.
That's always the follow-up on that compliment.
And since I've been working a bit on the issue of economic growth, not necessarily in GDP terms, but in terms of resource consumption, I was a bit worried about what you said, that it is possible. I'm not that certain that we know that much about the future. Future is always a bit uncertain, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the second element in it was that you say, we need this economic growth, we must have it, there is no other way. So that means that it's based on the assumption that decoupling will function, and then we will have an environmentally benign development and a significant economic growth high enough to finance all the things that we need in investment, blah, 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 in climate adaptation, and so forth and so forth. Okay. What if that fails? If either the growth is not benign, or if we do not have growth at all? And I do not see that the Commission has any plan B.
No.
Saying that we must succeed with this, we must have growth, puts you in a corner where you're completely helpless if that fails. So, and that is really frightening. What is your plan B?
No, you're absolutely correct there. So you took all my pretty value-based or subjective points, and rightfully so, because indeed, if I say there's no alternative, that's my opinion. And to be honest, I share that opinion, unfortunately, with a lot of others, and therefore it's the opinio communis that we have. And I might be a little traumatized, but as was said in my introduction, I work on environmental issues my whole life, but with one annoying pause, which was the fact that I was party leader for the Social Democrats in the Netherlands, part of a coalition, a governing coalition, in the worst economic crisis that we had since the World War. We did the experiment of economic shrinking. I don't think anybody liked it. It was a big disaster in terms of unemployment, in terms of public services, in terms of the way we have organized our society. So if we would need to make a plan B, and I agree that would always be better, having more plans than just one, but that plan B is not that simple because it will require a completely rewired society. And I'm not sure how many people outside of this room or elsewhere are willing to do that. I mean, as I said, I was a politician for a large part of my adult life, and I've experienced one thing that you might also experience. Outside of this room, there are many people that think their life is pretty complicated without my climate problems added on top of it. Many people are looking to at the end of the month, not at 2040, in anxiety about paying their bills, the cost of living. And it's very hard, and I would applaud the first politician that finds a compelling narrative to convince not just the high-educated elites of this country, but also the rest of this country, and especially the rest of the world, because that's where the challenge is most prominent, to say, no, we don't have to do this. We can have another benign society. And I had lots of these arguments with people saying, hey, you're talking about doing a little better, but that doesn't have to be material. No, true. So if we all get out of bed every day with the ambition to do a little better, that doing a little better doesn't have to be material, no. But most of the time it is. And I had people coming up to me say, oh, you talk about that, but I just want to hug my kid. That's my ambition, to do a little better, which is the best ambition in the world, especially being a parent. But then I asked her, what's the next piece of clothes you have to buy for that kid? Everything we do in society has a material component. And we have to find a way, technologically, behaviorally, to fit that within our planetary boundaries. And again, then I'm coming back to my techno-optimism, but also optimism about our behavior and our capacity to change that behavior. I think that is doable. So that's my plan A, and indeed, you need another person to define plan B. Maybe you can help me there.
Thank you. So I think there's room for one more question, but I see 2 hands there, 3 hands. So I would ask you to, each of you, to pose your question briefly, and then you have a short answer. And so first Halina, then Vanessa, and then...
Thank you. I'm Halina Brown of Clark University and the founder of Skorai. You actually answered your own question. You said we cannot, in our plan A, we have people who struggle every day to meet their basic needs. And here we are in Europe and North America, incredibly rich countries. So you basically inadvertently agreed that unless we reduce inequality, we cannot achieve any of these sustainability goals. So that is the first step. We can't talk about sustainability without first talking about the distribution of wealth within the societies and between societies. But let's start with within societies, because 90% of all economic growth goes to the top 1% of the people.
Thank you, Halina. So Vanessa, you have to wait for an answer until 2 other questions come in.
I'm gonna
Vanessa. Hi, Vanessa Timmer from One Earth Living at Utrecht University. I wanted to say that a lot of the framing of the Green Deal, the power of it, there's a bit of, for me, a bit of a tension, because I'm hearing you say that there's an existential crisis and that we need to move boldly, and that you also want to bring the kitchen table closer in order to get those bold policies to happen. And the solution spaces that you're defining around growth, technology, they're based in a kind of, they're still based in the existing way that we're operating today. And there's also kind of this sense of speed. And I just want to encourage that there might be a parallel need to create those bold policies by bringing the kitchen table closer through not just public engagement, but, for example, citizens' assemblies. remembering that this is a cultural challenge, not just a technological one. So, for example, making sure that we're shifting the narratives around this and really pushing on those values. And the reason that's critically important is because at the end of the day, we're not going to get there through these old stories. We're going to need to actually shift through those deeper values that you're talking about, how the children are kind of making this happen. And so I just want to say that we're, the Green Deal, the promise of it is not just as an economic deal. This is about an entirely new society. And the final thing I'll just say about it is, the last 5 years, there is this sense that there's lots has changed, and I would say people are more ready than we might think. For example, the GlobeScan survey said that 2/3 of people in 30 countries are ready to have their consumption to save the planet. So yes, we don't have to assume the same thing. So I just wanted to ask, with the Green Deal, are you also pushing this kind of the policy space as a cultural space, as a new society space, where not just we're looking at how we're economically growing, but how we're shifting as a society, recognizing that things are shifting in a big way culturally, not just technologically and in terms of the economic models?
Again. We have a lot to answer.
I'll
Last
try.
question.
Sorry, I'll try to be brief. Tamar Meshulam, Ben-Gurion University. So you said the technology we're making is mind-boggling, and I'm pretty sure that's a description of most technologies. The first windmill to produce flour without manual labor. I'm sure it felt like magic. How can we make sure the technology we're doing is for good, reducing coal and not going to cryptocurrency or AI or increasing demand in a sort of way?
Okay, try to run through those pretty fundamental things. But the first one might be the easiest one, because I obviously explained myself not correctly, but the biggest challenge, the Green Deal will only be successful if it's a just transition. Otherwise, there will just not be a transition. So redistribution is the key ingredient of making the Green Deal happen. We try to put that in our policies. I know the windmills get more traction and the solar panels, but the social policy enshrined into the Green Deal is actually our biggest challenge and the biggest part of it. Also in terms of money, by the way. But I contest your assumption that that would also lead to degrowth, because a fairer society has a better chance of sustainable growing than any other society. Redistribution is actually an ingredient for sustaining a sustainable growth. It's not ending growth. For redistribution, you need some growth in a society as I know it. And that brings me to the second question, because yes, obviously, and I see the paradigm and that many of this in this room cherish, the paradigm of a completely different society with a different, as I said, different wiring. I might be a conservative here, and I immediately settle for that. But we don't have the time. We don't have the time to have a whole revolution changing the society and then getting on a pathway towards being within planetary boundaries. We simply don't have that time, and I don't want to take that risk. I'm a social democrat, which is obviously a reformist, little steps forward instead of revolution, so I might be biased here. But I argue that we should not strive for a revolution in society to reach our objective. Revolution is chaos. You never know which objective comes out of that. But okay, I might be biased there. But I have one piece of evidence, and that's our own children. As I said, I applauded them. I think they are the factor changing our lives and our world for the better, and they've been grown up in this society. You could as well argue that they are the driver for change, as they're the most spoiled generation in the history of mankind. Because they are the most spoiled generation in the history of mankind. But still, growing up within this generation, within this society, they might be able to escape the inevitable wall that we are running into if we don't change our economy in terms of sustainability. How do I know that the technology is going in the right direction? I don't know. Well, yeah, that's always the a key issue with the use of technology. I would argue that I can be more certain about that with solar panels and windmills than I can be with nuclear reactors. So I think we have a sort of an intrinsic choice that made it a little safer, but you can never know for certain. But the comparison with the windmill turning wheat into flour, this is a galaxy out of there. The exponential growth curves that we see with solar panels and electrical cars and batteries and electrolyzers right now has never been accomplished in the history of mankind. So there is a difference that could make us a little optimistic. Could also scare the hell out of you, but it makes me a little more optimistic.
Thank you very much, Diederik. It was really inspiring and very great discussion. And the last word is to Sigrid, wherever she is. Yes. Here she is.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's on. Thank you very much. We have a conference about production and consumption, and actually we say sustainable consumption and production. So as techno-optimist, you tend to focus mostly on production, and we would say that the more techno-optimism there is, the more consumption there arises. But on the other hand, here I have a small gift, and I dare to give it to a techno-optimist because it's red and white wine from Wageningen, so climate change for techno-optimist. Maybe I can hand this gift for you. Thank you very much. Also, please, 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 an announcement. There's one. I think Lewis Akanji, are you here? Lewis, yes? We also have a gift for you. They were so mesmerized by your talk yesterday, so they completely forgot, but for you also. And last but not least, yeah. And last but not least, and that's a very mundane question, that I know there are many people have signed up for the dinner. Some of you will not be able to come. If you are not able to come to the dinner but have a dinner ticket, you are able to donate it at a reception desk so someone else can go. And this includes also students. So if you are having a ticket, are not going to use it, then please think about gifting it to the reception desk. Thank you and have a nice day.